Caro's ring drifted alone in the dark, a giant metal station hanging between dying stars. And everyone inside knew it would soon become a grave because the Varkan Dominion had arrived, tearing into space with ships so large they swallowed the light around them. And alarms screamed across the station as red warning lights painted the halls like blood, while many alien races gathered in the war chamber with fear written on every face. Knowing the Varkan never came to talk and never left survivors, and among these frightened leaders stood a small group of humans pushed to the back, treated as an afterthought because humanity was young, its worlds few, its ships small, and its power doubted. And at the center of them stood Captain Mara Vance, calm and silent, wearing a helmet so damaged that cracks spread across it like a spider's web and deep dents scarred the metal. Marks of old fire and older battles, and when a towering Varkan commander noticed her helmet, his many eyes narrowed with cruel joy, and he laughed loudly, mocking her in front of everyone, calling her armor trash and her presence an insult, and others joined in, sneering that humans did not even know how to honor warriors. But Mara did not react, did not shout, and did not defend herself. Instead, watching the tactical map where enemy symbols multiplied faster than anyone could stop them, showing that the station would fall within the hour, and when a nervous council member asked if she even understood what was coming, Mara answered with a single word: extinction, spoken so calmly that it unsettled the room, yet the Varkan commander only stepped closer, bending down to look at her cracked helmet, asking why she wore something broken and whether humans feared strength. And at last Mara touched one of the deep dents and explained that each mark came from a different enemy, that the helmet had seen more war than the Varkan bloodline ever had, which only made the commander laugh harder and call her words impossible. But Mara turned away, already walking toward the hangar, telling them to laugh while they could, because the war clan that made those scars was gone. And the commander replied with cold confidence that this meant she was already dead. Yet Mara smiled and said they lived through humanity, and as she left, the first human warships began to launch from hidden docks, small and rough-looking compared to the smooth terror of the Varkan fleet. But inside those ships were humans who had grown up on hard worlds, who had survived famine, war, and disaster, who carried old lessons written into bone and memory. And as the station shook from distant explosions and the stars outside began to vanish behind enemy hulls, the aliens who had mocked the cracked helmet began to feel something new and unfamiliar. A slow, creeping doubt, because the human captain had not spoken like someone facing death, but like someone greeting an old enemy. And in that moment, before the first shot was fired, the fate of Caro's ring was no longer certain, because humanity had arrived not to beg or run, but to fight, and the scars on that broken helmet were only the beginning of a story written in blood, fire, and unbreakable will. The battle erupted like a storm, and space became a battlefield of fire, smoke, and flashing energy as the human ships launched from Caro's ring with precision that no one expected, darting in and out of the enemy fleet like knives in the dark, small, ugly, and fragile against the massive Varkan dreadnoughts. Yet every human pilot moved with skill born of years of hardship and training, weaving through green plasma beams and exploding debris with a daring that made the alien commanders hesitate. And even as enemy fire tore into their ranks, blowing ships apart and turning sections of the station into fields of drifting metal, the humans did not retreat, they did not panic, and they did not surrender. Instead, they adapted, scattering to attack from impossible angles, coordinating strikes through signals and intuition that seemed almost instinctive. And at the center of the chaos, Captain Mara Vance guided the Uns resolute through the battle, her hands steady on the controls, her mind calculating every move, giving commands to her crew with calm authority, telling the shields to focus forward, engines to push to the maximum, and weapons to target the Varkan command nodes. While her soldiers moved in perfect sync, boarding pods launched into the enemy hulls, cutting through corridors and hallways with blades and rifles, and everywhere Mara looked, humans were fighting with a ferocity that was impossible to ignore, their courage growing with each explosion, their unity giving them power, and the Varkan, used to seeing civilizations crumble at their approach, began to hesitate as small human fighters rammed into flagships, tore through defenses, and disappeared back into the shadows of space, striking where the Varkan thought there was nothing, and inside the Resolute, Mara herself led a boarding team onto a massive Varkan dreadship. And when the enemy mocked her again at the sight of her cracked helmet, she did not flinch, but moved with deadly precision, parrying blows, deflecting plasma strikes, and striking down warriors faster than the eye could follow. Her blades slicing through armor as if cutting through air, her soldiers following her example, screaming and fighting with the energy of centuries of human survival. And then, in a critical moment, a Varkan warrior struck her helmet with a plasma blade, shattering part of it, revealing faint symbols beneath the dents that glowed briefly in the dim light of the ship. And the Varkan stopped, frozen, recognizing what Mara carried, whispering among themselves with fear and awe. For these were the symbols of the Helverin war line, a human warrior clan thought extinct 10,000 cycles ago, legendary for their unmatched ferocity and honor. A clan whose legacy had been erased from history, whose warriors were only remembered in myths. And as the realization sank in, Mara spoke, her voice strong even amid the chaos, telling them that the Helverins had died protecting others, but their skill, courage, and tactics lived on in humanity. And the Varkan, who had mocked and feared nothing, began to falter, unsure how to fight a species that carried the ghosts of unstoppable warriors. And Mara's words ignited a fire in her own soldiers, who fought with renewed energy, refusing to die, pushing forward through debris, fire, and shattered hulls, taking each victory, each strike, as proof that humans were more than their numbers, that they were a force that refused to yield. And as the Varkan commander saw his fleets faltering, his ships being boarded, destroyed, or evaded, he realized too late that this was not just a battle of weapons, but a battle of spirit, that humans fought not for survival alone, but because they would not allow themselves or their allies to fall quietly. And the echoes of the Helverin legacy flowed through Mara and every human soldier, each movement precise, each strike lethal, every sacrifice meaningful. And the Varkan, faced with a species that refused to die and carried the strength of warriors thought gone, began to retreat, their confidence shattered. And human ships surged forward, ramming the largest flagships, boarding the command centers, cutting down the alien warriors, dragging the wounded from fire and smoke, refusing to leave any comrade behind. And in that long, endless stretch of fire and chaos, Mara moved like a ghost of the past and a symbol of the future, her cracked helmet glowing faintly with the marks of the Helverins, showing the enemy that humanity was not to be mocked, that every dent and scar had a story. Every strike had purpose, and the humans, who had seemed weak and insignificant at first, became unstoppable, not because of superior numbers or technology, but because they carried the lessons of history, the courage of their ancestors, and the unbreakable will to fight, to endure, and to survive against any odds. And by the time the last of the Varkan hesitation turned into a retreat, the humans had shown the galaxy that their spirit could not be erased, that the legacy of a forgotten warrior clan had not died, but had been reborn in a new generation that would never bow to fear. And as the battlefront began to quiet, smoke and fire drifting into the dark void, The echoes of human defiance and relentless determination lingered, a promise that no enemy, no matter how vast or cruel, could ever take away. And the shattered remains of the station and fleet were testament to a people who fought with everything they had, who embraced their scars, their history, and their courage, showing the Varkan and every other watcher in the galaxy that humanity, though small, was a storm that could not be stopped. The battle had raged for hours, and space around Caro's ring was littered with debris, shattered ships and glowing clouds of twisted metal. Yet through the chaos, humanity's spirit had not wavered. And on the bridge of the Uns Resolute, Captain Mara Vance watched as the last Varkan dreadnoughts faltered under the relentless assault, their massive ships crippled, shields failing, engines burning. And for the first time in countless cycles, the enemy fleet began to break apart and retreat into the darkness of space, while the humans, battered and scarred but unbroken, pressed forward, seizing every advantage, taking every victory with sharp precision, and refusing to let a single alien ship escape without consequence. For each of them carried not only their own courage, but the legacy of the Helveran War, line written into the dents and cracks of Mara's helmet, which now rested on her head as a symbol of determination, endurance, and ancestral strength. And when the final Varkan flagship erupted in a brilliant explosion that sent shards of light spinning across the void, the battle finally quieted, leaving a silence heavy with the smell of scorched metal and the hum of damaged systems. And though the humans were exhausted, injured, and mourning the lives lost in the fight, they stood victorious, a force that no one had believed could achieve such a feat. And Mara, looking around at her crew, saw faces streaked with sweat, soot, and tears, each reflecting the same awe and relief she felt, realizing that the galaxy had witnessed something incredible, that humanity had stood against an enemy far older, larger, and more experienced, and yet prevailed through courage, ingenuity, and an unshakable will. And as the crew began to repair the Resolute, tending to the wounded and salvaging what they could from the wreckage, an alien council approached cautiously, their multi-limbed forms hesitant, their voices trembling with respect as they extended hands toward Mara, acknowledging her leadership and the proof of humanity's strength. And one elder, moving with deliberate care, picked up the cracked helmet, turning it over as though holding an ancient relic, and said softly that it was proof that humans carried the blood and spirit of warriors long thought lost, of a clan erased from history but reborn in new forms. And Mara shook her head, explaining that it was not the bloodline that mattered, but the choice to fight when others fell, to rise when others hid, to endure and protect even when the odds were impossible. And the council listened in awe, understanding that humanity's victory was not a matter of technology alone, but of spirit, will, and unity. And as the station and the remaining fleet of human ships began to stabilize, repairs underway, the humans looked out into the star-strewn void and saw possibilities where before there had been only fear, for they knew that their presence now commanded respect. Their courage had inspired awe and stories of the battle, of the cracked helmet, of Mara's leadership, would spread across the galaxy, reaching planets and systems that had once ignored humanity. And every story carried the lesson that humans, though young and underestimated, had a spirit that refused to bow, that carried the legacy of extinct warriors, and that even when faced with overwhelming odds, they could endure and triumph through sheer determination and heart. And while the Varkan dominion had not been completely destroyed, it had been shown that they were not invincible, that humans could match them, and perhaps even surpass them in courage and cunning. And as Mara finally removed her helmet, letting it fall to the floor, she did not mourn the loss of its battered metal, for its purpose had been fulfilled, its dents and scars telling stories of past courage and present victory. And around her, humans celebrated quietly and loudly, holding each other, helping the wounded, and feeling a deep shared pride because they knew that their species had faced the impossible and survived, that their strength was not just in ships or weapons but in heart, mind, and will, and across the galaxy. Messages of awe and fear traveled as other civilizations learned that humans could not be dismissed, that beneath their young and untested exterior burned the fire of warriors thought long dead. And in the quiet moments after the battle, as Mara stood on the bridge watching stars slowly return to the night sky, she understood that this was not the end, but a beginning, a signal to the universe that humanity was no longer weak or untested, that they carried not just themselves but the ghosts and lessons of history, and that whenever darkness and tyranny rose again, the humans would rise too, not as victims, but as guardians, fighters, and legends in their own right, leaving a lasting mark on the galaxy, proving that their spirit, courage, and resilience were eternal, that their story, beginning with a cracked helmet and a refusal to surrender, would be remembered forever, that humanity had arrived in the cosmos not to cower, but to shine, to endure, and to fight for all that they held dear, and that even when facing the impossible, the human heart and will could shape the stars themselves.